And for more, let's cross to Simon Mabon, senior lecturer at Lancaster University in England. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thanks for having me.
So you've heard but we don't know specifics yet, but we've heard the claim by Donald Trump that the sanctions will be targeting assets of the supreme leader. You've heard the response of the Iranians. What's your reaction?
I don't think this is particularly surprising. We knew that with this increase in tensions between the US and Iran, that eventually Trump would start to target the office of the supreme leader. And I'm being careful to talk about Khamenei, not Khomeini, as the president said. We knew that he was going to start putting pressure on the office of the supreme leader. He's done it in the past. We know that there's been sanctions placed on members of or key members, I should say, of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, the really prestigious military wing that is very close to the supreme leader, that it's tasked with preserving the ideological integrity of the revolution. So I don't think it's particularly surprising that Trump has really sought to up the ante to really put pressure on the supreme leader himself. It's not a particularly surprising move, and neither is the Iranian response. This is the latest step in this increasingly risky game of brinkmanship between Washington and Tehran.
A risky game of brinkmanship in which the leaks are very vocal when it comes to pulling back at the last second before going on some kind of a raid against Iran. And also what we heard over the weekend about cyber attacks that were possibly part of the strategy. Sure. Is this, why all of this for public consumption is, I guess, the question.
Well, I think it's a case of posturing. It's a case of this rivalry, this set of tensions playing out not only in the diplomatic back channels and the sort of the smoky halls, if you will, of international politics, but it's also playing out in the court of public opinion via Twitter and via social media and via the sort of international news coverage of these events. And I think that what we saw with the news about the cyber attack was potentially an attempt for Donald Trump and his administration to save a bit of face after doing a rather large about turn with regard to the military strikes that he later aborted. So I think it's potentially a face-saving exercise to say, well, look, yes, I didn't do this for these reasons, but I did take action against Iran. Now, it should be noted that Iranian officials have also said, well, it didn't really do anything, and it's just brinkmanship. So it's worth putting that into context, that Trump is playing this game. He's aware of the pitfalls of seeming weak, of coming across in a particularly weak way, not only for the Iranian case, let's remember, but also with regard to North Korea as well. So he's playing a very complex game on a number of different fronts, and he's having to get it right. But unfortunately, he's making some quite serious missteps here.
And in the middle of it all, he's sent his Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, before a regularly scheduled trip to India, first to Saudi Arabia, then to the UAE. What's the message there?
I think what Pompeo is trying to do is really shore up support amongst the US's key allies in the region. So we know that obviously Israel is central to US plans, but also Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, are absolutely integral to what Trump is trying to do with regard to Iran. We know that Saudi Arabia has had a very complex relationship with Iran since the revolution of 1979, but it's also the case with the United Arab Emirates. And it's a very complex set of relations, political and security relations between the Emirates and Iran, which has pushed the Emirates into this alliance with Saudi Arabia and the United States. So I think Pompeo's visit is really trying to shore up support and put in place a number of strategies for future activities, depending on what Iran does next.
Depending on what Iran does next, Simon Mabon, we spoke to Saudi Arabia's foreign minister, Mark Perlman, sat down with him. Here's what he had to say.
We are for sanctions. I believe that anything that can be done to increase the pressure on Iran to change its policies should be done. I think they're looking at sanctions involving perhaps the gas sector. They're looking at sanctions, other sanctions. And I will leave this to the financial experts and the economic experts. But the idea is to increase the pressure on Iran so that Iran knows that there's a high price it has to pay and that Iran's policies are not acceptable and have to change.
Simon Mabon, as Adel Al-Jubeir is stating his wish list when it comes to sanctions on Iran, the pressure increasing on Saudi Arabia, what with those resolutions making it through Congress to stop support for the war in Yemen.
Yeah, of course. And it's not just the Yemen issue, but it's also the fallout from the Jamal Khashoggi affair with the UN report that's due to be published this week. And we heard some of the highlights from that last week, suggesting that Mohammed bin Salman is directly responsible for something. We don't know exactly what yet because the report hasn't come out. But you're certainly right to say that there's a great deal of concern in the United States, in the UK, across Europe, that weapons that are being made in these particular states are being used by Saudi Arabia in Yemen to commit some quite worrying crimes there. So yeah, the pressure is certainly ratcheting up in Saudi Arabia, not only politically, but internationally, in terms of public opinion, but also in terms of the economic issue, because the conflict in Yemen is incredibly expensive. It's an incredibly costly war. And the longer it goes on, the more difficult it's going to be for Saudi Arabia to move towards this new vision 2030 that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince, has put in place. So it's a real delicate balancing act, not only for Trump, but for Adel Al-Jubeir, for Mohammed bin Salman, and for the other Saudi officials who are trying to set out different strategies, not only to address the Iran crisis, but to deal with issues in Yemen and to try and stave off the PR crisis coming out of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
One final question. We're getting breaking news. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, has been speaking, and he says later this week, among those who will be hit by sanctions are Iran's foreign minister, Mohammad Javad Zarif, who, of course, was at the center of those nuclear talks that led to the deal back in 2015. Your reaction?
I think this is perhaps slightly more surprising than the sanctions placed on Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, in the sense that Zarif has been the one who studied in the US. He was central to the negotiations for the nuclear deal. He's the one that has been potentially doing the back channel work, and he would be the one to do a lot of the back channel work for bringing about an end to any type of crisis. We know that to make a peaceful resolution from conflict, there has to be talks. And it's incredibly difficult to hold those talks when one side has placed economic sanctions on one of the key negotiators or key interlocutors, if you will, of the other side. So I think this is perhaps quite a strange move, but it just demonstrates the extent to which the United States wants to put Iran under as much economic and political pressure as possible.
Simon Mabon, Senior Lecturer at Lancaster University. Thank you for speaking with us here on France 24.
Thank you.